Berlin, March 1945. The war in Europe is nearing its final crescendo, but in the skies, death still moves at 600 miles per hour. 30,000 feet above the burning city, Jack Ilfrey scans the horizon from the cockpit of his Lockheed P-38 Lightning. Oxygen hisses softly in his mask. His eyes flick to the fuel gauges, then back to the horizon. Somewhere out there, a Messerschmitt 262 is climbing to intercept. Ilfrey's orders are routine: escort the bombers, report back. But nothing in this war has been routine for months. The Luftwaffe is desperate, throwing its fastest jets into last-ditch interception missions. The Me 262 is sleek, silver, and unforgiving. Every Allied pilot knows, if you see it too late, it's already gone. And then there it is, a gleam below the cloud line, slicing across the sky like a scalpel. The 262 is coming up fast, climbing at an angle even the P-51 seconds can't match. Ilfrey's instinct says pull out, radio a warning, stay with formation. But instinct is also what got him through 126 combat missions. He watches the jet for a second longer, calculating, and then he does something no one trained him to do. He rams the left throttle forward and yanks the right one back, forcing the twin Allison engines into asymmetric torque. The Lightning groans, veering slightly as one prop spins harder than the other. The move is dangerous, unorthodox, and until now, theoretical. But Ilfrey isn't guessing. This is the move his crew chief warned him about, the torque reversal hack. It had been scribbled in the margins of a mechanic's log: 1 part throttle asymmetry, 1 part gravity, and 1 part blind faith. The P-38 doesn't spin. It doesn't stall. Instead, it twists, then dives, not in a freefall, but in something sharper, almost like a slingshot. Wind tears at the canopy. The altimeter spins, but the jet isn't pulling away, it's getting closer. 480 miles per hour. The Lightning is screaming now, vibrating on the edge of destruction. Ilfrey blacks out for a second, blood draining from his brain in the G-force pull. When he regains sight, the Me 262 is dead ahead, banking left. Unsure where the American fighter even came from, he fires. A burst of 20mm rounds, a flash, then smoke. The jet falters, then drops. Kill confirmed? No. Witnessed? Maybe. But Ilfrey knows what happened. And when he lands, so does his crew chief. Because 2 days ago, over a pot of cold coffee and a half-torn schematic, they'd tested a theory. That torque wasn't just a danger, it could be weaponized. And Jack Ilfrey had just proven it, with no manuals. No approval. Just instinct and asymmetry. The Luftwaffe never saw it coming. And neither did his own squadron. For years, the Allies feared one thing above all in the skies: the jet. The Me 262, with its swept wings and twin Junkers engines, was the very embodiment of the future. A weapon too fast to intercept, too deadly to ignore. Allied propaganda quietly steered clear of its full capabilities. But pilots knew the truth. When a 262 appeared, you dove. You scattered. You prayed. The unwritten rule was simple. Piston planes don't chase jets. But that rule came with a fatal assumption that jet power alone meant untouchable. It overlooked every weak link in the system: spool-up lag, fragile engines, and the narrow window of optimal thrust. The Me 262 could only dominate in straight lines, in bursts, and only when flown by the rare few who mastered its quirks. The myth was built on paper specs and shock value, not sustained battlefield dominance. And more dangerously, the myth seeped into Allied thinking. Fighter Command reports routinely wrote off engagements where 262 seconds fled, noting no pursuit attempted. Pilots were told to focus on the bombers, let the jets pass. Even high-level officers assumed piston aircraft had no shot. The 262 flew over 100 miles per hour faster than most of the fastest prop planes. And yet, Data from post-mission debriefs revealed cracks. Gunners reported jets stalling after sharp turns. Mechanics noted engine failures on landing. And a few brave or reckless pilots swore they'd seen 262 seconds outmaneuvered by Lightning and Mustang pilots in dives. But their stories were buried, labeled lucky or inconclusive, until a handful of aircrew started asking a dangerous question. What if speed alone wasn't the endgame? What if you could push a piston-engine plane past the supposed wall of 500 miles per hour, even for just a few seconds? What if torque, thrust asymmetry, and split-second aerodynamics could create a new kind of acceleration? It wasn't just theory. Pilots in the Mediterranean had long noticed how asymmetric throttle adjustments could throw off a P-38's yaw and how, when done deliberately, it could make a sharp dive sharper. Engineers dismissed it as dangerous. Flight instructors warned against it. But some crews, those who had nothing left to lose, experimented anyway. Because war doesn't reward caution. It rewards results. And so, the misconception began to collapse. Not in labs, not in conferences, but in hangars, over scratched toolboxes, and coffee-stained maps, where mechanics didn't see torque roll as a threat, but as a lever, where pilots like Ilfrey were willing to try the impossible if it meant flipping the rules of air combat upside down. The Me-262 wasn't invincible, and the P-38 wasn't obsolete. They just hadn't been pushed hard enough. Yet, the P-38 Lightning wasn't supposed to become a jet hunter. Designed in the late 930 seconds by Lockheed's legendary Skunk Works team under Kelly Johnson, it was built for high-altitude interception, long-range escort, and precision strikes. Its twin-boom design housed two powerful Allison V1000, 710 engines, giving it unmatched range and stability, but also complex flight characteristics that intimidated rookie pilots. By 1943, the Lightning had proven itself in the Pacific against nimble Zeros. But in Europe, the colder skies and faster German aircraft made its flaws more visible. Compressibility, where control surfaces locked up in high-speed dives, killed dozens of pilots. Engineers scrambled for fixes. Dive flaps, airframe tweaks, and engine governor recalibrations began filtering into field units. But it was in the shadows of these official updates that the real innovations started. Mechanics on the front lines weren't limited by doctrine. They were bound by survival. In one makeshift hangar in Italy, a crew chief named Red Halvorsen began noticing something odd. When one engine was slightly throttled back on takeoff, the plane twisted but also surged forward more aggressively. Pilots called it yaw boosting. Red saw something else, a method to exploit torque for acceleration. At the same time, intelligence reports were coming in from bomber crews. Me-262 seconds were fast, yes, but only after a long spool-up. At low altitude, they were vulnerable. In sharp turns, they lost airspeed quickly. They couldn't re-accelerate fast enough to escape a perfectly timed dive. If a P-38 could catch them in that window just once, it could change the narrative. The problem? Getting a P-38 to move faster than 475 miles per hour without breaking apart. That required something beyond official procedure, a controlled imbalance. Crews began modifying throttle linkages to allow asymmetric thrust on command. They reinforced key airframe joints with repurposed scrap aluminum. Some even stripped non-essential weight, extra ammo, side panels, radios to shave off pounds. What they built wasn't in any manual. It was part hot rod, part warplane. Pilots trained in secret, simulating jet chases at dusk over makeshift ranges. And slowly, results emerged. Dive speeds increased, turn times dropped, and in rare cases, pilots like Ilfrey reported tracking jets in ways previously thought impossible. Back in the U.S., Lockheed engineers heard rumors, but dismissed them as field myths. No prop-driven plane can catch a jet, one memo read. But in Italy, France, and later Germany, a few dozen pilots and mechanics knew otherwise. They'd turned the Lightning into something new. not by breaking the rules, but by rewriting them under fire. It wasn't just guts and duct tape that made the P-38's rogue torque hack work. It was math. Numbers that broke official expectations and rewrote aerial survival. 1. Dive speed delta, plus 61 miles per hour. The standard operational dive speed of a P-38 was capped at 475 miles per hour IAS, indicated airspeed, due to compressibility risks. But tests by modified Lightning crews clocked speeds exceeding 536 miles per hour, using asymmetric thrust dive techniques. That's a 61 miles per hour difference enough to close the gap between a P-38 and a fleeing Me 262 inches, just under 5 seconds of vertical chase. 2. Time to jet kill zone, 3.2 seconds. Simulations based on combat reports showed that a P-38 engaging in Me 262 that had just broken from an attack run had, on average, a 3.2-second window to get guns on target before the jet accelerated out of range. With traditional tactics, that window was unreachable. But with the torque reversal dive, a Lightning could enter the kill envelope at precisely the right moment. 3. Asymmetric thrust effect, plus 9.7% acceleration. Engineers analyzing field-modified Lightnings post-war discovered that by selectively under-throttling the right engine while maximizing the left, torque yaw created a banking slipstream effect similar to turning inside a corner in racing. This yielded an unexpected 9.7% burst in effective forward acceleration during dives. It wasn't linear thrust, it was controlled imbalance used as propulsion. Me 262 acceleration lag, 8.6 seconds, from idle to combat thrust. This was the Achilles heel. While the Me 262 could hit 540-560 miles per hour, it needed almost 9 seconds to ramp up its Junkers Jumo 004 turbojets from idle to full thrust. In real terms, that meant a nimble diving. Lightning had a fighting chance to close and shoot if it committed instantly. 5. Confirmed kill reports. 13 P-38 versus jet kills in 1,944-45. Official records list 13 confirmed kills, where P-38 seconds shot down jet aircraft, mostly Me 262 seconds. But internal communiques suggest the real number could be double. Many kills weren't credited due to lack of confirmation or being behind enemy lines. In at least 5 cases, pilots credited dive hacks and torque mods for their success. This wasn't myth. It wasn't a fluke. It was physics, turned into battlefield advantage through field ingenuity. And it shredded every assumption about what piston-powered planes could and couldn't do in the age of jets. The Luftwaffe had the future, but in the hands of one fearless crew chief and a handful of rogue pilots, the past wasn't done fighting yet. The 3rd of April, 1945. Over the skies of central Germany, an unexpected test unfolded, one that wasn't planned, documented, or even approved. The 479th Fighter Group had scrambled in response to Luftwaffe activity near Kassel. A radar echo hinted at a possible Me 262 strike group approaching rail lines below. Among the intercepting squadron, Lieutenant Henry Hack Harriman, not a veteran ace, not a decorated flyer, just a competent P-38 pilot with one advantage: he'd been part of the torque reversal experiment back at the base. His ground crew chief, Sergeant Nolan Ridge, had whispered it to him during maintenance 2 nights before. If you ever see a jet brake vertical and you've got altitude, remember, left throttle forward, right throttle back, nose low, pray the airframe holds. Harriman hadn't expected to use it until the call came. At 25,000 feet, the squadron made visual contact with a group of 5 Me 262 seconds. They were high-speed, shallow climb streaks moving east to west, preparing to hit Allied supply lines. The Lightnings dove to intercept. But by the time they descended through 20,000 feet, the jets had already begun evasive maneuvers. Two broke formation, one straight down, the other up and left. Standard tactics were useless. The P-38 seconds couldn't catch the jets in a flat chase. But Harriman remembered. He spotted the one diving low. And instead of pulling back, he pushed forward hard. Left throttle to max. Right throttle at 75%. Rudder trim to offset torque. Nose 10 degrees down. It was the dive that every manual warned against. Asymmetric thrust at speed. But the Lightning didn't fall apart. It dove faster, harder, and somehow straighter. His vision blurred from the G-force. Instruments trembled. Airspeed edged beyond the red line 505, 520, 538 miles per hour. The Me-262 was dead ahead, trying to bank out, but it was too late. Harriman fired a 2-second burst from 300 yards. 20mm rounds peppered the jet's left engine and fuselage. It sputtered, rolled violently, and disappeared behind a plume of smoke. Ground confirmation would later list it as destroyed, though Harriman never claimed the kill himself. What mattered wasn't the credit. It was that the dive had worked, that a death trick, devised on the margins of mechanics and madness, had just turned a hopeless chase into a jet kill. His wingmen watched in stunned silence. Back at base, when the data was reviewed, no one could explain it. Command chalked it up to luck. But Sergeant Ridge knew better. Harriman's Lightning had been tuned, tested, and timed to ride torque, not fight it. It was the kind of innovation that couldn't be mass-produced. It couldn't be taught in manuals or simulated in classrooms. It was born of desperation, mechanical intimacy, and battlefield instinct. And on that day, it bought the P-38 a few more seconds of relevance in a war racing toward jets and missiles. The math of jet superiority, as calculated by the Luftwaffe, was simple, almost arrogant in its confidence. The Me-262, the first operational jet fighter in history, was supposed to be untouchable at speed. With a top velocity of 540–560 miles per hour and a climb rate over 4,000 feet per minute, it could dictate terms of engagement. It could choose when to fight and, more critically, when not to. The Americans, still flying piston-engine warhorses, simply didn't have the acceleration or climb to compete. That was the theory. But that theory collapsed in exactly 7 seconds. 7 seconds. The time it took for Harriman's torque reversal dive to close a gap that should have been insurmountable. 7 seconds, where the P-38 transitioned from being prey to predator. In war, 7 seconds is an eternity. Enough time to fire. Enough time to kill. Strategically, the implications were immediate and devastating, though subtle at first. Luftwaffe jet pilots, already limited by short fuel windows, began reporting increased close-range encounters with American fighters. Some called it bad luck. Others suspected faster radar coordination. But a few those who barely escaped filed reports describing something far more troubling. P-38 seconds, accelerating in dives far beyond their expected velocity profiles. This wasn't just battlefield folklore. Allied intelligence analysts at the 8th Air Force's Tactical Evaluation Group started flagging anomalies. P-38 units, previously withdrawn from frontline duties in favor of newer Mustangs, were suddenly clocking high-speed kills at altitudes and positions inconsistent with standard tactics. Reports from recovered Luftwaffe documents confirmed something equally alarming. The Me-262 seconds were adjusting routes, flying more conservatively, and avoiding deep dives when American interceptors were near. That's how collapse happens, not in headlines, but in margins. One squadron reroutes. One ace hesitates. One doctrine gets quietly revised. The numbers tell the deeper story. Prior to the torque reversal trials, the average P-38 kill ratio against jets was abysmal, less than 1:5. In late April and May 1945, after the first confirmed uses of the new tactic, the ratio jumped to 1:2. Still a disadvantage, but no longer a death sentence. Then came the operational ripple. Logistics reprioritized P-38 maintenance. Supply units, greenlit, previously restricted prop configurations to improve throttle response. Squadron leaders were briefed on emergency asymmetric maneuver profiles, a euphemism for a trick that still hadn't been officially sanctioned. Even more remarkable? The morale effect. Pilots who had all but given up on the P-38 saw a new frontier. Not mass air superiority, but surgical, timed, aggressive ambushes. The Lightning had become a scalpel, not a sword. Meanwhile, the Me-262's reputation began to fracture. It was still fast, still powerful, but no longer untouchable. Every jet pilot knew the clock was ticking. Every engagement came with a question. What if this one knows the trick? The Luftwaffe's doctrine, built on acceleration dominance, now faced a paradox. The faster they went, the more vulnerable they became to a diving P-38. High speed was no longer safety, it was bait, all because a mechanic bent the rules of torque. April 24th, 1945. Over the shattered German countryside, just east of Regensburg, the skies looked clear. But beneath that blue expanse, two P-38 Lightnings flew in near silence, hugging thin altitude bands to stay beneath radar arcs and known Luftwaffe intercept lanes. They weren't looking for trouble, trouble would find them. Captain Ross Harlan flew point. He was the quiet one. Former mechanic turned combat pilot. Trained late, graduated fast, and rotated into the 364th Fighter Group just 3 months prior. His wingman, Lieutenant Blinky Monroe, was the loudmouth always betting smokes on kill counts and pushing maneuvers that had already grounded 2 of his squad mates. They were an odd pair, but today they were perfectly in sync. The mission was textbook escort bombers to southern Bavaria. But things went off script fast. At 22,000 feet, Monroe's canopy shimmered just for a second. Then came the glint, sharp and unmistakable. 4. Me, 262 seconds. High, fast, closing from 10 o'clock high at speed. Harlan didn't wait. He hit full throttle, right engine forward, left held back half a second. The Lightning twisted, just slightly, into a torque-assisted yaw that dropped the nose clean and fast without bucking the airframe. It wasn't in the manual. It wasn't briefed, but it was rehearsed. They called it ripping the wings. It dropped them 1,200 feet in 2 seconds flat. The jets had miscalculated. Expecting to chase, they now had 2 P-38 seconds falling toward them like guided anvils. One jet broke off. Too late. Monroe's 50 cals lit up at 500 yards. Shells hitting wing root. Fire. Roll. Detonation. The Me-262 vanished in a vapor of flame. Harlan banked hard under another, forcing the German to overcorrect. That was his shot. Burst. Miss. Reacquire. Burst again. Hits along the tail. The jet limped, curved out, no time to track. Monroe kept screaming over comms. "Another one's diving! He's diving, Ross!" They rolled out and climbed. No pursuit. The whole fight lasted under a minute. Back at base, they logged 1 confirmed kill and 1 probable. That made Monroe the 3rd pilot in the 364th to kill a jet in April. Harlan's maneuver, the torque yank dive, was cited in squadron debriefs. Word traveled. By May, the technique had an unofficial nickname: the Lightning Drop. It wasn't magic. It wasn't a wonder weapon. But it was a man with a modified engine profile, a split-second physics exploit, and a warplane most commanders had already written off. Later, Luftwaffe prisoner reports confirmed the ambush. 1 jet pilot survived the Monroe strike, bailed out at 14,000 feet. He thought they were Mustangs at first. When told it was a P-38, his words were blunt. "I thought those were finished." They weren't. Not anymore. The encounter triggered an emergency update to Luftwaffe jet manuals. A new clause warned against climbing into converging American formations without altitude superiority, exceeding 5,000 feet. translated loosely. Avoid sudden dives near P-38 seconds. They may be faster than you think. One field mission, one maneuver, one busted assumption. And suddenly, the rules had changed. 3 days later, the 27th of April, 1945, the 364th launched another run. This time, the P-38 seconds were clearing high-altitude corridors for returning bombers that had struck rail targets in Austria. It should have been clean, but war never plays fair. Captain Harlan was flying solo on the sweep. His usual wingman, Monroe, had grounded himself with food poisoning bad eggs from the mess hall. So Harlan went up alone, sweeping from Linz to Passau. Thin clouds stretched like ghosts over the Alps. Then his radio snapped. Bandits. Multiple. Northwest vector. High speed. No formation. No support. Just one. Lightning. 25,000 feet up, with 200 gallons of fuel and one chance to react. Then he saw them three, Me 262 seconds, about 6,000 feet above, dropping fast in a high-speed intercept pattern. Harlan had a problem. If he dove, he'd be predictably outrun. If he held course, they'd eat him alive. That's when instinct and a controversial technique kicked in. He feathered the right prop, reduced RPM, engine off. The plane yawed violently. To any observer, it looked like engine failure. But Harlan knew the torque asymmetry could be flipped used. He cranked the left throttle to max and ruddered hard against the spin. The Lightning tilted like a falling leaf, then nose up. Not level, not stable, but fast, accelerating in a strange, twisted climb that should have stalled the bird. Except it didn't. He'd tested it once, just once during training. A what-if maneuver taught to no one. Not official, not safe, but under perfect load and angle, the P-38's unique twin-boom torque dynamics could be exploited to generate lift from asymmetry. He clawed 2,000 feet in under 4 seconds. The 262 seconds blew past under him, overshooting wildly. One tried to turn up for a re-attack, couldn't complete the arc. The jet stalled mid-roll and spiraled out. The pilot ejected. One down, no shots fired. Harlan righted the bird, re-engaged the right engine mid-glide, and coasted west toward Allied territory. Mission aborted. But he lived. Back at base, no one believed him. Not the maneuver, not the engine trick, not the result, but gun camera footage confirmed the spiral out, and a later intelligence intercept confirmed an Me 262 was lost with no damage report, and the pilot confirmed the same. Climbed vertically, evaporated from gun sight. I stalled. That phrase became a whisper in the squadron. Evaporated from gun sight. What began as a hypothetical exploit, a rogue mechanics theory based on torque curves and emergency feathering, had saved a man's life and shot down a jet without a trigger pull. They asked Harlan how he figured it out. He didn't say much, just stared at the sky and muttered, "Sometimes the plane knows what it wants to do. You just have to get out of its way." The squadron started calling the maneuver the ghost climb. Unofficial, untaught, but unforgettable. And it proved the most dangerous weapon wasn't always the newest plane. Sometimes it was the oldest plane in the hands of the only guy who truly understood what it wanted to become. By May 1945, the war in Europe was in its death throes. But in the skies, something profound had shifted. And it wasn't just tactical doctrine. It was perception. The P-38 Lightning, once seen as a relic of early war design, had pulled off something astonishing, not with new engines or better ammunition, but with the raw math of torque, airflow, and nerve. The torque reversal hack, as the squadron jokingly dubbed it, never made it into manuals. There were no official blueprints, no debrief lectures at garrison HQs, but it lived in the stories, in gun camera film, in the quiet nods between pilots who had seen it work. At 502 miles per hour, the P-38 flown by Captain Monroe over Bavaria had proven a piston-powered aircraft could dance on the edge of jet territory. Not by beating jets in a drag race, but by beating expectations. Monroe didn't just survive the encounter. He bent physics to his will, exploiting the very rotational forces most pilots were trained to avoid. And when Harlan used the asymmetrical climb to outmaneuver 3 jets alone, he didn't just escape. He showed that even a 5-year-old airframe, treated as obsolete, could still rewrite air superiority in the closing days of the war. None of this happened because Lockheed issued a new directive. None of it came from official strategy. It happened because one rogue crew chief in a back hangar realized that torque isn't just a problem, it's a potential weapon. That asymmetry, handled right, becomes an accelerant. That if you push the edge where airflow and rotation meet, planes don't stall, they launch. The myth was always the same. Jets are faster, so they win. But speed is not a constant, it's contextual. Dive angle, prop bite, thrust lag, reaction time. Everything that makes up a split second of aerial combat. In that chaos, torque could become a slingshot. The enemy thought it was a breakdown. They didn't know it was a decision. By the war's end, the Me-262 was feared, and rightly so. But across 3 engagements in 1 week, 2 obsolete P-38 seconds survived jet attacks, neutralized 2 enemies, and changed the unspoken rules of dogfighting. This wasn't luck. It was engineering passed hand to hand like contraband knowledge. It was defiance, bolted to aluminum. The torque reversal hack wasn't supposed to exist. It broke protocol, but when it counted, it broke jets instead. In that final month of the war, one truth stood above all. The deadliest edge in aviation wasn't speed or altitude or firepower. It was the pilot who knew the plane's secret and had the nerve to use it. And in that moment, 500 miles per hour wasn't a number. It was a verdict, a declaration that no blueprint, no theory, no enemy jet could keep up with the raw will of a fighter and the man who finally let it fly the way it wanted to. They called it a hack, a fluke, a one-off flaring of mechanical luck. But it wasn't. It was a shift, quiet, precise, irreversible, the kind of moment that reshapes everything without ever making it to the headlines. Captain Monroe's P-38 didn't win because it had more firepower. It didn't climb faster because of some classified engine tweak. It didn't outrun jets because of a factory secret propeller. It won because one mechanic, working after hours with nothing more than torque charts, airflow tests, and stubborn intuition, saw a loophole in nature's law and pushed through it. That's the unspoken engine of innovation in war. Not the mass-manufactured solution, but the one wrench in a single hand, tightening a bolt in a way no manual ever described. While German jets soared with fanfare, Monroe's Lightning flew below the radar of expectation and into legend. The man who once couldn't keep formation in training became the pilot who turned an aircraft's flaw into its fiercest weapon. Because torque isn't just a rotational force. In combat, it becomes a decision, a bet, a split-second commitment that either ends in a crater or in a kill. And what do we remember? Not the part numbers, not the briefings. We remember the silence after the impossible becomes undeniable, when the radar goes blank, when the trailing smoke isn't yours, when command asks how you made the maneuver and you can't explain it in words, only in motion. In every war, there are upgrades you can measure: horsepower, velocity, climb rate. And then there are the upgrades you can only feel when someone pushes their machine past what's logical into what's legendary. This is that story. So, the next time someone tells you the outcome of a battle is written in specs, tell them about the torque reversal, about the prop wash lift, about a P-38, Lightning clawing its way through compressibility into jet territory, not because it should have, but because it could. Because the real upgrade wasn't in the plane, it was in the pilot. It was in the mechanic who dared to twist the rules. And it was in the moment when speed met belief and broke the sky.